Hello, wonderful people. I hope you guys are all doing well. Before we start, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you like these kinds of videos. Also, let us know where you guys are listening from. Okay then, let's begin. Batman, the Dark Knight of Gotham City, is one of the most compelling and complex superheroes ever created. While his mission is widely regarded as one of justice, his true purpose may be something far more intricate and personal. Could Batman's true purpose be to defeat his own legacy? This question taps into the deepest layers of Batman's character, not just as Gotham's protector, but as a man struggling to reconcile his past with his present, and ultimately to free himself from the very legacy that formed him. Batman's legacy is shaped by tragedy, the brutal loss of his parents, and this singular event sets into motion a lifelong mission of vengeance, redemption, and justice. But what if Batman's crusade isn't just about saving Gotham or vanquishing criminals? What if it's in fact about a deeper, more personal battle, the battle to defeat the very legacy that defines him? The birth of Batman Sip's legacy. A mission born from trauma. The essence of Batman's identity is inextricably tied to the night his parents were murdered in a dark alley. That pivotal moment, more than any other in his life, shapes Batman's mission and his legacy. From that point on, Bruce Wayne's life was never about being a child again. It was about becoming something more. He transforms into Batman, Gotham's vigilant protector, but his actions are all rooted in the grief and trauma of that night. His legacy in many ways is built on the need to avenge the murder of his parents, and by doing so, to prevent others from suffering the same fate. But there is a deeper question lurking beneath the surface of Batman's mission. Is Batman's legacy truly about Gotham and justice? Or is it about confronting and ultimately defeating the psychological legacy of his past? The death of Thomas and Martha Wayne created a vacuum in young Bruce's life, one that was filled by the figure of Batman. However, that legacy of loss, pain, and revenge cannot be dismissed. It continues to haunt Batman and, paradoxically, is a driving force behind his need to impose order on a chaotic world. Batman is constantly, perhaps unconsciously, engaged in a battle not just against Gotham's criminals, but against the very memory of the loss he has never fully reconciled. His true purpose may not simply be about saving others. It could be about trying to save himself from the overwhelming grief and emotional scars that have shaped his life. The weight of Batman Sep's legacy. A burden of perfection. Batman's moral code, his refusal to kill, his unyielding commitment to justice, is often seen as the defining characteristic of his heroism. However, this moral code, which sets Batman apart from the very criminals he hunts, also serves as the bedrock of his psychological struggle. Batman believes that if he were to cross the line and kill, he would be no better than the very individuals he fights against. The problem, however, is that this code, while it sets him apart as a hero, also acts as a cage. Batman has constructed his entire identity around this moral stance. But in doing so, he has created an impossible standard for himself. His legacy of moral purity becomes a psychological trap that forces him into a constant state of emotional repression. Batman's refusal to kill is rooted in the fear that if he gives in to the violence that he has witnessed throughout his life, he would lose himself, become consumed by the very darkness that he is trying to fight. This sense of moral perfection becomes a burden. The more he upholds this ideal, the more he isolates himself from the very human connections that might allow him to heal. Batman's relationships are strained by this burden, as he continuously distances himself from those who care about him. Alfred, Robin, and even Rachel Dawes all feel the emotional weight of Batman's inability to truly open up or let go of his mission. In his quest to defeat Gotham's criminals, Batman ends up waging a more profound internal battle, the battle against the emotional scars of his past and the legacy of trauma that defines him. The Joker. The legacy sips. Dark reflection. No villain is as synonymous with Batman as the Joker. The Joker's role in Batman's life is not just as a criminal mastermind, but as a reflection of everything Batman fears about himself: chaos, anarchy, and the destruction of the moral code that he holds so dear. The Joker represents the very opposite of Batman, the complete rejection of structure, order, and morality. But the Joker's chaos is not simply a counterpoint to Batman's heroism. It is a reminder of the fragility of Batman's carefully constructed moral code. The Joker's goal is not just to destroy Gotham or Batman. It is to break Batman's very sense of identity. Every time the Joker challenges Batman to kill, he is not just testing Batman's moral resolve, he is forcing Batman to confront his own psychological fears. The Joker wants to expose Batman's darkest fear, that beneath the mask of the Dark Knight, Batman is just as vulnerable, just as capable of chaos, as any of the criminals he seeks to stop. The Joker's chaos, the utter rejection of moral rules, represents what Batman fears will happen if he ever abandons his code. If he were to kill, he would lose himself, his identity, and his humanity. But in many ways, the Joker's manipulation reveals the truth about Batman's legacy. It is not simply one of heroism and righteousness. It is also a legacy of trauma, of emotional repression, and of a need to control the chaos that he fears might consume him. By challenging Batman's moral code, the Joker forces Batman to confront the very essence of his being, the fear of his own potential for darkness, and the inability to reconcile the trauma of his past with the man he has become. The Joker's ultimate goal is not to simply break Batman physically. It is to force Batman to confront the legacy that has defined him and to break free from the chains of his past. Batman sits true purpose, a battle with his legacy. At the heart of Batman's journey is a profound question. Is Batman truly fighting for Gotham, or is he fighting to defeat the legacy of trauma and pain that has defined him? His mission to protect the city is undoubtedly noble, but it is also a continuation of a personal battle that has been raging since the moment he lost his parents. Batman's identity is inextricably tied to his past, and his purpose has always been shaped by the legacy of that loss. However, what if Batman's true purpose lies not in the protection of Gotham, but in confronting and ultimately overcoming the very legacy that has shaped him? The more Batman fights crime, the more he realizes that his true enemy is not just the criminals of Gotham. It is the psychological legacy of loss, guilt, and grief that continues to control him. The more Batman attempts to break free from the emotional hold of his parents' deaths, the more he finds himself ensnared by it. Gotham, in many ways, becomes a symbol of Batman's internal conflict, a city filled with darkness and chaos, mirroring the emotional darkness that has consumed him. Batman's crusade against crime is ultimately a crusade to escape the legacy of trauma that defines his identity. But as long as he remains tied to that legacy, Batman will continue to fight an internal battle that may never truly end. As we move forward in exploring Batman's true purpose, the complexity of his psychological struggle becomes more apparent. Batman is not just fighting criminals, he is fighting against the very legacy that defines him, the trauma of his parents' deaths. His mission to protect Gotham is deeply entwined with his desire to rewrite the narrative of his childhood. This creates a constant internal tension. Batman's legacy is one of grief, vengeance, and an obsessive need for control, and these elements are woven into every aspect of his life. But what if the real battle that Batman faces isn't just against Gotham's criminals, but against the very identity and legacy that drives him? The burden of legacy. Gotham, as a reflection of Batman Sip's inner struggle. Gotham City, the dark and crime-ridden backdrop of Batman's crusade, is more than just a city. It is a physical manifestation of Batman's own psyche. Gotham's corruption, violence, and chaos mirror the emotional turmoil Batman has endured since his childhood. Just as Gotham is plagued by crime and decay, Batman is haunted by the trauma of losing his parents, and the city itself becomes a symbol of the emotional and psychological chaos that continues to consume him. The more Batman tries to rid the city of its darkness, the more he is confronted with the darkness within himself. Batman's battle against Gotham's crime syndicates, supervillains, and corrupt officials is an external manifestation of a far deeper internal conflict. Gotham's decay represents the emotional rot that Batman fears lies within him. The deeper he fights to protect the city, the more he reinforces the very legacy he wants to escape. The very legacy of loss, vengeance, and control that defines Batman's existence is being reflected in Gotham's decay. The city's suffering is Batman's suffering, and it traps him in a cycle of perpetual conflict. Batman Sip's desire for control, the legacy of perfection and isolation. Batman's need for control is one of his defining characteristics. It is a psychological necessity born from the trauma of his past. After the death of his parents, Batman lost control over his own life. That loss of control, that feeling of helplessness, became the catalyst for his transformation into the Dark Knight. But as Batman continues to impose order and justice on the chaotic world of Gotham, his need for control becomes all-consuming. He refuses to allow the world to spiral into chaos, just as he refuses to allow himself to confront the chaos within. His moral code, which dictates that he never kill and that he always fight for justice, is not simply about ethics. It is about maintaining control over his emotions and fears. This obsession with control has far-reaching consequences. It is the reason Batman isolates himself from others. His refusal to let anyone close, to open himself up to the possibility of love or companionship, stems from the belief that he must maintain control over his emotional world at all costs. Relationships with those who care about him, Alfred, Robin, Rachel, suffer because Batman cannot allow himself to be vulnerable. His need to keep his emotional walls intact keeps him from experiencing any true emotional connection. The legacy of his parents' deaths, which fueled his need for control, also prevents him from experiencing the healing power of human connection. The more Batman tries to maintain control over his emotions and his mission, the more he becomes isolated. This self-imposed isolation is a direct result of his fear that vulnerability will make him weak. His inability to trust others, his refusal to share the emotional burden of being Batman, all contribute to a legacy of loneliness and repression. Gotham's criminals may fear the Dark Knight, but it is Batman's own fear of vulnerability, of losing control, that truly defines him. The more he clings to this need for control, the more he reinforces the legacy of emotional isolation that shapes his life. The cycle of trauma and vengeance. Batman Sip's unfinished battle. Batman's need for control is also tied to his desire for vengeance. The loss of his parents and his inability to stop their deaths has left Batman with a deep sense of guilt and anger. His pursuit of justice, his fight against crime, is as much about protecting Gotham as it is about avenging the loss of his parents. The criminals he faces, the supervillains he battles, are often representations of the chaos and violence that took his parents away from him. Each fight Batman engages in is a way to regain the power he lost that night in the alley. His entire mission is built on the idea that he can right the wrongs of his past by stopping crime, punishing those who commit violence, and ensuring that no one else suffers the way he did. However, this pursuit of vengeance comes at a great cost. The more Batman battles to avenge the death of his parents, the more he becomes trapped in the very cycle of violence that defines his legacy. Gotham's criminals, who represent the darkness and corruption that Batman seeks to eliminate, are in many ways a reflection of the very trauma that defines him. Each victory against these criminals is a temporary escape from the pain of his past, but it never truly brings closure. Batman's legacy of vengeance becomes a never-ending cycle, a battle that can never be fully won because the source of his pain, the trauma of his parents' deaths, can never be undone. This unrelenting pursuit of vengeance ultimately leaves Batman emotionally depleted. The more he tries to bring justice to Gotham, the more he distances himself from any possibility of emotional healing. His legacy of vengeance, rooted in his grief, becomes a psychological trap. The more he seeks to punish those responsible for the chaos in Gotham, the more he is bound by the trauma that fuels his actions. Batman's true purpose, then, might not be about defeating Gotham's criminals. It might be about breaking free from the cycle of vengeance and trauma that defines him. The legacy of the Dark Knight, a symbol of perpetual conflict. Batman's legacy as the Dark Knight is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is a symbol of hope for the people of Gotham, a beacon of justice in a city plagued by crime and corruption. On the other hand, it is a symbol of the emotional scars that define him. Batman's mission, while noble, is ultimately a reflection of his need to maintain control over a life defined by loss. The Dark Knight is both a hero and a man haunted by the past, and the legacy of the Dark Knight is a reminder that no matter how much Batman fights, he will never escape the trauma that has shaped him. The true tragedy of Batman's legacy is that it is not just about Gotham. It is about Batman himself. Gotham's salvation, in many ways, is tied to Batman's redemption. The more Batman fights for justice, the more he must come to terms with the legacy he has built. The cycle of vengeance, the need for control, and the emotional isolation all contribute to a legacy that, while heroic on the surface, is ultimately a prison that traps Batman in a never-ending battle. Batman's true purpose, then, might not be to save Gotham or defeat crime. It may be about confronting the emotional legacy of his past, breaking free from the cycle of trauma and vengeance, and finding a way to heal from the wounds that have defined him. But until Batman can accept that his legacy is not just about protecting others, but about healing himself, he will remain trapped in a perpetual state of conflict, battling not only Gotham's criminals, but the darkness within himself. As Batman continues to battle both Gotham's underworld and his inner demons, the notion of his true purpose comes into sharper focus. While Batman's outward mission is to save Gotham and protect its citizens, the deeper psychological struggle suggests that his true purpose may be less about external heroism and more about an internal reckoning with the legacy he carries. Batman's mission has become a way of escaping his trauma, but by doing so, he only deepens the very emotional scars that define him. The cycle of crime fighting, Moral rigidity and emotional repression perpetuates the legacy of fear and loss that keeps him locked in the past. Gotham, as a metaphor for Batman, sips unresolved trauma. Gotham City, with all its corruption, crime, and perpetual decay, serves as more than just the backdrop for Batman's crusade. It is, in many ways, a reflection of Batman's psyche. The city is mired in darkness, with crime seemingly everywhere, much like Batman's own mind, which is clouded by the unresolved trauma of his childhood. Gotham's streets are littered with reminders of the chaos and violence that have plagued the city for decades, just as Batman is constantly reminded of the tragic event that sparked his transformation into the Dark Knight. Despite Batman's efforts to rid the city of its corruption, Gotham's problems seem endless. It is as though the more Batman tries to impose order, the more chaos emerges to challenge him. This endless cycle of violence and crime mirrors Batman's internal struggle. No matter how many criminals he apprehends, no matter how many lives he saves, the pain of his past remains ever present. Just as Gotham cannot seem to escape its darkness, Batman too is trapped in the emotional darkness that stems from his parents' deaths. His legacy of grief and vengeance drives him to continue fighting, yet it also prevents him from finding peace. This perpetual cycle of battle, both external and internal, is the heart of Batman's true struggle. The more he attempts to heal Gotham, the more he becomes entrenched in the very trauma that defines him. His mission is not just about protecting others, but about confronting the emotional and psychological wounds that he has spent his life avoiding. Gotham is a battleground, but it is also a mirror of Batman's own fractured sense of self. A city that will never be fully saved until Batman can confront the legacy of pain and loss that drives him. The cost of Batman sits morality, a relentless pursuit of justice. Batman's strict moral code, which forbids him from killing his enemies, is one of the defining features of his character. His refusal to kill criminals is both a noble stance and a psychological crutch, a way to maintain control over the chaos of his emotions. For Batman, killing would represent the ultimate breakdown of his moral code and, by extension, the collapse of the structure that he has built to shield himself from his past. But in upholding this rule, Batman sacrifices something far more important: his ability to heal. The more Batman clings to his moral code, the more he isolates himself from the possibility of true emotional release. He cannot allow himself the catharsis that might come from killing, even in cases where it might seem justified. This refusal to let go of his rigid principles locks Batman in a state of perpetual emotional tension. His inability to break free from his self-imposed moral constraints becomes a barrier to healing, not just for Gotham, but for himself. Batman's sense of duty, his commitment to justice, and his obsession with control all serve as defense mechanisms to protect him from the overwhelming grief he still carries. But this defense, while keeping the darkness at bay, also keeps him from confronting the reality of his emotional pain. In a way, Batman's obsession with his moral code becomes his greatest vulnerability. The more he upholds this code, the more he reinforces the trauma that defines his existence. His fight against crime is no longer just about justice, it is about control. The act of refusing to kill, of adhering to his own strict sense of right and wrong, is a way for Batman to hold on to the illusion of control over a world that has continually shown him how helpless he truly is. But the cost of this obsession is steep. Batman's legacy, shaped by grief and vengeance, becomes the very thing that prevents him from finding the peace he so desperately seeks. The legacy of the Dark Knight, a hero defined by his past. Batman's identity as the Dark Knight is both his greatest strength and his greatest burden. The Dark Knight symbolizes justice, resilience, and unyielding moral fortitude. However, this persona is built upon a foundation of pain and trauma. Batman is not simply a man of principle, he is a man defined by loss. His transformation into the Dark Knight was born out of the death of his parents, and his actions, his fight for justice, are deeply intertwined with the unresolved grief and vengeance that stem from that event. In many ways, Batman's legacy is not one of heroism, but one of trauma. While Gotham views him as a symbol of hope, the true nature of his identity is far more complicated. Batman's moral code, his refusal to kill, and his constant fight against Gotham's criminals are all shaped by the legacy of his childhood. He does not fight crime simply because he wants to protect Gotham. He fights because he is unable to overcome the emotional scars that define his life. The legacy of the Dark Knight is not one of peace or healing. It is a legacy of perpetual conflict, both external and internal. Gotham's salvation is Batman's salvation, but both are locked in a cycle of violence, grief, and isolation. The true tragedy of Batman's legacy is that, despite his best efforts, he may never be able to escape it. The more he fights to protect Gotham, the more he becomes ensnared by the very darkness he seeks to destroy. The fight for justice, for order, for control, becomes a never-ending battle against the past, a battle that Batman cannot win as long as he remains shackled to the trauma of his parents' deaths. His legacy is not one of success or victory, but one of continuous struggle, defined by a deep and unshakable emotional pain. The true purpose confronting the legacy to achieve redemption. At the heart of Batman's journey is the question of whether his true purpose is to save Gotham or to save himself from the emotional legacy that has defined him. Batman's entire existence has been built around the need to prevent others from experiencing the same loss he did. But this mission, while noble, also becomes a prison. The more Batman fights to protect Gotham, the more he fights against the very trauma that has shaped his life. His legacy of vengeance and grief becomes a constant weight on his shoulders, and it is only through confronting this legacy that Batman can hope to find redemption. The key to Batman's redemption lies not in his fight against Gotham's criminals, but in his ability to confront the trauma that continues to haunt him. His moral code, while it has served him well in his mission, is also a barrier that prevents him from healing. Batman must learn to let go of his need for control and his fear of vulnerability. Only by confronting the darkness within himself, by acknowledging the pain of his past, can Batman hope to escape the cycle of trauma and become free from the legacy that defines him. The true purpose of Batman, then, may not lie in his fight to save Gotham, but in his fight to save himself, to heal from the emotional wounds that have shaped his identity, and to break free from the very legacy that has kept him trapped in a never-ending cycle of grief and vengeance. Batman's path towards self-actualization, if it exists at all, is a difficult and complicated one, marked by deep psychological barriers. His refusal to kill, his obsession with justice, and his emotional isolation create a facade of strength and resolve. Yet, these traits, while outwardly heroic, are at their core mechanisms of self-protection, designed to shield Batman from confronting the very emotional vulnerability he fears most. The paradox is that while Batman's mission to fight crime and protect Gotham is rooted in noble intentions, the legacy he seeks to uphold is built on trauma and vengeance, and this legacy ultimately traps him in an endless cycle of emotional repression. The legacy of fear. Batman and his fear of vulnerability. Batman's legacy, like the city he protects, is built on fear. From the moment Bruce Wayne witnesses the murder of his parents, fear becomes the defining force in his life. Fear of loss, fear of powerlessness, and fear of becoming like the criminals he fights. But what is often overlooked in Batman's struggle is the central role that fear plays in his own psychological state. Batman's mission to impose order on Gotham is not only a fight against crime, it is a fight against his own vulnerability, his own fear of emotional chaos. His refusal to kill is not just about morality, it is a response to the fear of losing control and succumbing to the same violence that took his parents away. Throughout his journey, Batman works tirelessly to instill fear in the hearts of Gotham's criminals. He believes that fear is a tool, a necessary weapon in his crusade to fight crime. But what Batman fails to recognize is that the fear he instills in others is a direct reflection of the fear that controls him. His fear of vulnerability, of letting go of control, is the very thing that perpetuates his emotional isolation and his inability to heal. Batman's refusal to acknowledge his own vulnerability is the key to understanding his legacy. By clinging to the identity of the Dark Knight, by continuously fighting Gotham's criminals, Batman is constantly reaffirming his own fear of weakness and loss. He cannot allow himself the luxury of softness, of healing, because to do so would mean confronting the emotional wounds he has spent his entire life trying to avoid. This fear of vulnerability prevents Batman from forming meaningful relationships and embracing the possibility of emotional intimacy. His bond with Alfred is strained by his emotional detachment, and his relationship with Robin is marred by his unwillingness to allow his young partner to make moral decisions on his own. Even Rachel, the woman Batman loves, is kept at arm's length. Batman's emotional walls prevent him from fully connecting with those around him, and this isolation only reinforces the very legacy of trauma he is trying to escape. His fear of letting anyone close is a reflection of his deeper fear, that by allowing vulnerability into his life, he would lose the sense of control that has defined his existence. Breaking the cycle, Batman sets unfinished journey. Batman's journey is one of perpetual conflict, not only with Gotham's criminals, but with the legacy of his past. The more he fights to protect the city, the more he becomes trapped in the cycle of trauma and grief that has defined his life. Gotham's endless struggle with crime mirrors Batman's own inability to move beyond the pain of losing his parents. Each time Batman triumphs over a criminal, the victory is hollow because it does not address the underlying emotional turmoil that drives his mission. His mission to rid Gotham of its darkness is, at its core, a mission to rid himself of the darkness within. However, the more Batman fights to rid the world of evil, the more he becomes ensnared by the very darkness he seeks to overcome. The emotional distance that Batman maintains between himself and others is a coping mechanism, a way to keep the trauma of his past at bay. However, this emotional isolation is also what keeps Batman from healing. His legacy of fear, guilt, and loss is reinforced every time he refuses to open up or allow someone to share in his emotional burden. His refusal to kill, while morally admirable, is also a psychological barrier that keeps Batman from addressing the real source of his pain. Until Batman can acknowledge the emotional trauma that lies at the core of his being, he will remain trapped in the very legacy he seeks to defeat. The Joker's role in Batman's life is significant precisely because he forces Batman to confront this cycle. The Joker's chaotic nature, His rejection of all moral boundaries represents the complete opposite of everything Batman holds dear. But while the Joker embodies the chaos Batman fears, he also serves as a mirror to Batman's own struggles. The Joker forces Batman to question whether his crusade for justice is truly about Gotham's salvation, or whether it is about Batman's own need to atone for his past. The Joker's challenge to Batman's moral code, the repeated attempts to push him to kill, forces Batman to confront the very fear he has been avoiding, that his mission is not just about justice, but about confronting the legacy of trauma and loss that defines him. The true purpose: defeating the legacy, not the criminals. In the final analysis, Batman's true purpose may not lie in the fight to rid Gotham of its criminals, nor in maintaining his moral code against all odds. His true purpose may be far more personal: to defeat the very legacy of trauma, grief, and vengeance that has defined his life. Every fight, every villain, every criminal he defeats may simply be a way of distracting himself from the emotional work that needs to be done. Batman is not simply fighting for justice, he is fighting to overcome the fear, guilt, and pain that have controlled him since childhood. The key to Batman's redemption lies not in his external battles, but in his ability to confront his internal demons. Only by acknowledging the trauma of his past, by confronting the legacy of loss and grief that has shaped him, can Batman hope to break free from the cycle of emotional repression and isolation. Gotham's criminals will always be there, but Batman's true enemy is not crime, it is the darkness within himself. The more Batman tries to save Gotham without confronting his own pain, the more he reinforces the very legacy he is trying to escape. To defeat this legacy, Batman must let go of his need for control, his fear of vulnerability, and his obsession with moral purity. Only by embracing his own humanity, by allowing himself to feel the pain of his past, and open himself to the possibility of emotional healing, can Batman truly defeat the legacy that has trapped him for so long. The true purpose of Batman is not to save Gotham from criminals, but to save himself from the emotional prison that has defined his existence. As we continue to dissect Batman's psyche, the narrative of his purpose grows even more complex. His mission, which is outwardly about saving Gotham and delivering justice, serves as a vehicle for Batman to cope with the inner turbulence and psychological fractures that define his existence. But what is often overlooked is the profound toll that this endless cycle of heroism takes on him, emotionally and mentally. Batman's legacy is inextricably tied to his inability to heal from his past, and the more he seeks justice externally, the more he becomes ensnared in his own legacy of fear, grief, and unresolved trauma. The impact of legacy on Batman's morality and actions. Batman's moral code, his strict refusal to kill, stands as a symbol of his heroism. However, this code is not merely an ethical stance. It is a psychological mechanism crafted to shield him from confronting the deeper emotional wounds he has never healed. Each time Batman chooses not to take a life, it reinforces the very trauma that motivates him. His parents' murder, the helplessness he felt as a child, and the anger that drives him to constantly right the wrongs of the world. The refusal to kill is rooted in the fear that by breaking this one rule, he will descend into the chaos he so vehemently opposes. But this fixation on the moral high ground, while it might make Batman a revered figure in Gotham, also traps him. His strict adherence to this rule creates an emotional blockade. He cannot allow himself the closure that comes from ending a villain's life when it might be necessary, even if it saves innocent lives. Each time Batman upholds his moral code, he is not simply keeping his promise to his parents or to Gotham. he is suppressing a part of himself, the fear that if he were to break this rule, the chaos of his past would consume him. The problem with Batman's moral code is that it is not just about justice. It is a reflection of his refusal to confront the trauma that has defined his life. His commitment to never kill, even in the face of overwhelming odds, isolates him from those who might offer him healing. His relationships with Alfred, Robin, and even Rachel Dawes suffer because Batman cannot open himself to the possibility of love or emotional vulnerability. He holds on to his moral code like a lifeline, but in doing so, he also holds on to the very legacy that continues to haunt him. This creates a tragic paradox. The more Batman tries to protect Gotham, the more he becomes trapped in the cycle of grief and loss that defines his existence. The legacy of emotional repression. Batman sips inability to let go. The more Batman fights, the more his emotional repression deepens. His obsession with justice, his constant war against crime, and his refusal to engage in anything resembling a normal life all point to a deeper psychological issue. Batman cannot allow himself to heal because doing so would mean confronting the vulnerability that he has spent his entire life avoiding. His legacy of trauma is the foundation of his identity, but it is also the very thing that prevents him from living a fulfilled life. Batman's fight for justice is not just about Gotham, it is about trying to escape the emotional prison that holds him captive. His fear of vulnerability and emotional connection keeps him isolated. His relationships with others are marked by emotional distance, and his refusal to allow anyone into his world only reinforces the cycle of emotional repression that defines his existence. By pushing away the people who care about him, Batman denies himself the healing power of human connection. This is a direct result of the trauma he suffered as a child. The loss of his parents has made it impossible for Batman to trust others, to allow himself to feel vulnerable, and to embrace the possibility of love. The more Batman isolates himself, the more he feeds the very legacy that has trapped him. Gotham may need saving, but so does Batman, yet he cannot bring himself to face the truth. His mission to protect the city and punish the guilty is at its core a mission to redeem himself from the emotional wounds of his past. But the more Batman refuses to confront his own pain, the more he isolates himself from the possibility of redemption. The cycle of emotional repression continues, and Gotham's problems persist, because Batman has not learned the crucial lesson that his true purpose lies not in protecting the city, but in confronting the psychological legacy of his past. The Joker. The ultimate challenge to Batman's legacy. In Batman's journey, the Joker plays a central role, not just as a villain, but as a psychological adversary who forces Batman to confront the very core of his identity. The Joker, with his complete disregard for moral boundaries, challenges everything that Batman stands for. Where Batman seeks order, control, and justice, the Joker embodies chaos, unpredictability, and the rejection of any moral framework. But the Joker's role is more than that of a mere antagonist. He is a mirror to Batman, forcing him to confront the very darkness within himself. The Joker seeks to break Batman's moral code not simply by creating chaos, but by making Batman question the very nature of his mission. The Joker understands that Batman's refusal to kill is not born out of moral superiority, but from psychological necessity. By challenging Batman's code, the Joker forces him to confront the truth about his identity, that his obsession with justice is not just about saving Gotham, but about saving himself from the trauma of his past. The Joker's greatest strength lies not in his ability to inflict physical harm, but in his capacity to manipulate Batman's sense of self. Every time the Joker pushes Batman to the brink, he is forcing him to face the emotional truths that Batman has been running from for years. The Joker does not just want to see Batman fail, he wants to break Batman to make him confront the emotional chaos that lies beneath the surface. The Joker's ultimate goal is to show Batman that the very thing that defines him, the Dark Knight persona, the refusal to kill, the moral code, is an illusion, a construct designed to protect him from his own fears and pain. By forcing Batman to confront this illusion, the Joker becomes the catalyst for Batman's self-reflection, and in doing so, the Joker may be unwittingly helping Batman face the one thing he has avoided his entire life, the need to defeat his own legacy. Breaking free from the legacy. A path to redemption. The key to Batman's redemption lies in his ability to let go of the very legacy that has defined him. His refusal to kill, his emotional isolation, and his obsessive need for control are all manifestations of his fear and grief. Batman cannot escape his legacy until he confronts it, until he allows himself to face the emotional trauma that has driven him for so long. His purpose, then, is not just to save Gotham, it is to save himself. He must break free from the chains of his past and confront the darkness within. Only by doing so can he begin to heal, not just as a hero but as a man. Batman's journey is ultimately about breaking free from the trauma that defines him. The legacy of his parents' deaths, the legacy of grief and vengeance, has shaped his every decision, every action. But this legacy also traps him in a cycle of emotional repression and isolation. Batman cannot truly save Gotham until he saves himself, and saving himself means confronting the very legacy that has made him the man he is. Only when Batman accepts his vulnerability, lets go of his need for control, and confronts the emotional scars of his past, will he truly be free from the legacy that haunts him. As Batman's emotional and psychological journey unfolds, the deeper complexities of his mission begin to emerge. His fight for justice, which he believes is his life's true purpose, might not be the resolution to his inner conflict. Instead, his relentless pursuit of order in a chaotic world is rooted in a desperate need to break free from the emotional inheritance that defines him. Gotham is not just the city he seeks to protect, it is the stage upon which he performs an endless battle against his legacy, his grief, and the unresolved trauma that continues to shape his every action. The cost of heroism. Batman's legacy of sacrifice. Batman's legacy of sacrifice is one of the most significant elements of his identity. He sacrifices his own happiness, his relationships, and his personal well-being for the sake of Gotham. This selflessness, while admirable, comes at a great emotional cost. Every night Batman spends fighting crime is a night he spends isolated from the world around him, distant from the human connections that could offer him the healing he so desperately needs. The more Batman sacrifices, the more entrenched he becomes in his own legacy. His willingness to put Gotham's needs above his own desires stems from a deep sense of duty, his belief that he must protect the city in order to atone for the sins of his past. But the tragic irony of Batman's sacrifice is that, despite his heroic actions, he never allows himself the opportunity for true healing. His identity is so wrapped up in the idea of sacrifice that he becomes trapped in the role of the Dark Knight, unable to break free from the cycle of emotional repression that defines him. Batman's legacy of sacrifice is also mirrored in his relationships. Alfred, Robin, and Rachel all experience the toll of Batman's devotion to his mission. While they care for him and want to help, Batman is unable to accept their support because he feels that the price of his heroism must be paid alone. His inability to connect with others emotionally is not because he does not love or care for them, but because he is so consumed by the fear of vulnerability and the need to protect Gotham. His legacy of sacrifice, while it makes him a hero in the eyes of the city, isolates him from the very people who could offer him the emotional release and redemption he seeks. Batman and the absence of healing, the legacy of emotional suppression. One of the central themes in Batman's journey is the idea that his refusal to heal is just as damaging as his refusal to kill. By constantly fighting crime and putting his mission above everything else, Batman denies himself the emotional space to confront the trauma of his past. His mission to protect Gotham becomes a distraction, a way to avoid dealing with the emotional scars that have defined him since childhood. This refusal to heal is not just a psychological defense mechanism. It is a manifestation of Batman's greatest fear. He is afraid that if he confronts the darkness within, he will lose himself. The emotional numbness that Batman carries with him is a direct result of his fear. That vulnerability will expose him to the very chaos and pain he has worked so hard to avoid. Yet this fear of vulnerability only deepens his psychological isolation. The more Batman pushes others away, the more he reinforces the legacy of trauma and loss that has shaped his entire existence. Batman's emotional suppression also manifests in his relationships with those who care for him. The more he tries to protect Gotham, the more he isolates himself emotionally from Alfred, Robin, and Rachel. These people represent the possibility of emotional healing, love, trust, and human connection, but Batman cannot accept their presence in his life. His legacy of emotional repression, built upon years of avoiding his trauma, prevents him from experiencing the very things that could help him heal. His refusal to allow others in and his unwillingness to heal are the emotional chains that keep him trapped in the role of the Dark Knight, perpetually fighting a battle that can never be won as long as he remains emotionally detached. The Joker, the catalyst for Batman's self-reflection. As we've discussed, the Joker is not just Batman's greatest enemy. He is also the catalyst for Batman's self-reflection. The Joker represents the chaos and unpredictability that Batman fears most. Where Batman seeks order and control, the Joker embraces anarchy and destruction. Their relationship is one of constant tension, not only because of their opposing ideologies, but because the Joker forces Batman to confront the emotional fragility that he tries so hard to hide. In many ways, the Joker is Batman's dark reflection, a chaotic figure who challenges the very core of Batman's identity. The Joker knows that Batman's moral code, his refusal to kill, and his unyielding commitment to justice are not merely signs of moral superiority. They are a product of psychological necessity, a way for Batman to maintain control over the emotional trauma of his past. The Joker understands that the key to breaking Batman lies not in defeating him physically, but in forcing Batman to confront the emotional scars he has spent his life trying to suppress. The Joker's provocations are designed to force Batman to break his rule and, in doing so, expose the fragility of his identity. Batman's strict moral code, his refusal to kill, is the very thing that separates him from the criminals he fights. But it is also the thing that prevents him from healing. Every time the Joker challenges Batman's code, he is forcing Batman to face the fear that lies at the heart of his existence, that his entire mission is not about saving Gotham, but about saving himself from the emotional darkness he has never truly confronted. In a way, the Joker's role in Batman's life is essential for Batman's eventual redemption. While the Joker seeks to destroy Gotham and Batman's moral code, he is also the force that forces Batman to question the very foundation of his identity. Batman's fight against the Joker is ultimately a fight against the legacy of trauma that has defined his life. By challenging Batman's refusal to kill, the Joker forces Batman to confront the fear of his own emotional fragility, the truth about the legacy he has spent his life trying to escape. Batman sips redemption. Breaking free from the legacy, the true purpose of Batman may not lie in his battle against Gotham's criminals, but in his battle to break free from the legacy that has defined him. Gotham, while important, is merely the stage upon which Batman's true fight takes place. The external fight against crime and corruption is merely a distraction from the internal fight that Batman must face. The fight to confront the trauma and grief that have defined his existence. Batman's real purpose, then, is to defeat the very legacy of loss, vengeance, and emotional repression that keeps him trapped in a cycle of perpetual suffering. To achieve redemption, Batman must confront the very things he has been running from: his fear of vulnerability, his grief over the loss of his parents, and his need for control. These fears, rather than being the driving force behind his heroism, are the chains that keep him imprisoned in the role of the Dark Knight. Only by confronting these fears, by allowing himself to heal, and by breaking free from the emotional isolation he has built around himself, can Batman hope to find peace. Batman's redemption lies not in the external battles he fights, but in his ability to heal from the trauma that has shaped him. Gotham may need saving, but Batman's true enemy is the legacy that has defined him. Only when Batman can free himself from the chains of his past can he truly move forward and embrace the possibility of a life beyond the mask. As Batman's story progresses, the internal conflict he faces between fulfilling his role as Gotham's protector and confronting the legacy of his past intensifies. Each time he confronts a new threat, whether it's the Joker, Bane, or the League of Shadows, he is not only battling the criminal forces of Gotham, but also engaging in an ongoing psychological battle that keeps him tethered to his past. Batman's mission to save Gotham and protect its people is noble, but it is also an attempt to shield himself from the emotional chaos that still lingers from his parents' deaths. In this struggle, Batman's true purpose emerges, not just as a hero who battles crime, but as a man seeking to break free from the emotional prison that has defined his entire existence. The role of sacrifice in Batman Sip's legacy. One of the defining aspects of Batman's character is his willingness to sacrifice everything for Gotham's safety. He gives up his personal happiness, his ability to form meaningful relationships, and even his physical well-being to ensure that Gotham remains safe from the forces of crime and corruption. Batman's sacrifice is rooted in the idea that Gotham's needs come before his own. His unwavering commitment to his cause reflects the depth of his trauma, the belief that he must constantly atone for the loss of his parents. This sacrificial nature, while noble, comes at a significant emotional and psychological cost. In many ways, Batman's sacrifice is a direct result of the legacy of his past. The more he sacrifices, the more he feeds into the trauma that has defined his life. His dedication to protecting Gotham becomes a way for him to avoid confronting the deep emotional wounds that he has buried. By continuing to sacrifice his own needs for the sake of Gotham, Batman distances himself from the possibility of healing and redemption. His emotional repression and isolation are perpetuated by this sacrificial role he has assumed. Gotham's safety is not Batman's only goal. It is a mechanism for avoiding the true work of confronting his own legacy. The deeper Batman immerses himself in the sacrifice of his personal life, the further he distances himself from the potential for recovery. This pattern of sacrifice reinforces his belief that he is unworthy of happiness or peace. In his eyes, the loss of his parents makes him a prisoner of duty, and he cannot afford to let go of that responsibility. The tragedy, however, is that by dedicating himself entirely to Gotham, Batman ultimately condemns himself to a life of emotional isolation and repression. He sacrifices his own emotional well-being for the sake of others, all the while unaware that this very sacrifice prevents him from breaking free from the legacy of pain that has shaped his life. The duality of Batman sips. Purpose. Protector versus prisoner of his own legacy. The duality of Batman's identity, both as the protector of Gotham and the prisoner of his own legacy, becomes a constant internal struggle. On one hand, Batman is driven by a noble desire to protect the city, to ensure that no one else suffers as he did. On the other hand, this mission becomes a prison that keeps him trapped in the trauma of his childhood. Batman's entire existence is a balancing act between being the hero Gotham needs and being a man who cannot escape the shadow of his past. This duality is most evident in Batman's relationships with others. He maintains a facade of stoicism, a hard, emotionless exterior that allows him to be the Dark Knight, a symbol of justice and fear. But beneath that exterior lies a man who is deeply scarred by the loss of his parents and is struggling to maintain control over his emotions. The more Batman tries to keep his emotions in check, the more he reinforces the legacy of emotional suppression that defines him. His mission to protect Gotham and keep it free from crime is in many ways an extension of his fear of vulnerability. Batman's inability to allow himself to be vulnerable prevents him from fully connecting with others and healing from the wounds of his past. Batman's fear of vulnerability is most visible in his relationships with Alfred and Robin. Alfred, his surrogate father, has always been there for him, providing guidance, wisdom, and support. However, Batman continually pushes him away. Alfred's attempts to connect emotionally with Bruce are constantly met with rejection, as Batman refuses to allow himself to feel anything that might expose his emotional vulnerability. Similarly, his relationship with Robin is strained by Batman's refusal to allow his partner to make independent moral decisions. Batman's control over Robin's actions reflects his fear of losing control, of allowing someone else to take responsibility for the decisions that drive him. Even with Rachel, the woman Batman loves, his emotional distance is apparent. Rachel represents a life beyond Gotham, beyond the mask of the Dark Knight. She represents the possibility of a normal, emotionally fulfilling life. Yet, despite his love for her, Batman cannot allow himself to fully embrace that life. His fear of letting go of his duty, of allowing someone to share the burden of being Batman, keeps him emotionally detached. Rachel becomes another reminder of what Batman cannot have, a life free from the legacy of trauma that has shaped his entire identity. Gotham, the city as a reflection of Batman Sep's psychological prison. Gotham itself is not only Batman's battleground, but also a reflection of the emotional and psychological prison he has constructed around himself. The city, much like Batman's inner world, is a place of constant conflict and decay. The more Batman fights to restore order to Gotham, the more he is confronted with its underlying corruption. Similarly, the more Batman tries to control his emotions and protect others, the more he is confronted with his own psychological decay. Gotham, much like Batman's psyche, is a city that is constantly on the brink of destruction, unable to escape the cycle of crime and violence that defines it. In many ways, Gotham is a mirror of Batman's own mind, a place of chaos, darkness, and corruption. The more Batman tries to impose order on Gotham, the more he is reminded of the chaos that exists within himself. Each new villain Batman faces, whether it's the Joker, Bane, or the League of Shadows, represents an external manifestation of the emotional chaos that threatens to consume Batman. These villains challenge Batman not just physically but psychologically, forcing him to confront the fragility of his moral code and the fear of losing control. As Gotham remains mired in violence and corruption, so too does Batman remain trapped in his own emotional turmoil. His fight for justice is in many ways a reflection of his fight against the darkness within himself. Gotham's suffering mirrors Batman's own inability to heal from the emotional trauma of his childhood. Each villain that Batman faces is not just a criminal to be defeated. It is a reminder of the emotional scars Batman continues to carry. The more Batman tries to rid Gotham of its corruption, the more he is forced to confront the very legacy that has defined him. Gotham and Batman are inextricably linked, and both are trapped in a cycle of darkness that seems impossible to break. The possibility of redemption, Batman sits, need to break free from his legacy. The true purpose of Batman may not lie in his ongoing fight against crime or his pursuit of justice for Gotham. His true purpose, ultimately, is to break free from the legacy of trauma and emotional isolation that has defined his life. Gotham's salvation is tied to Batman's own redemption. Until Batman confronts the emotional wounds of his past and lets go of the fear that drives him, he will remain trapped in the role of the Dark Knight, endlessly battling against the same emotional and psychological demons. The Joker, in many ways, represents the force that forces Batman to confront these demons. While Batman seeks order and control, the Joker embodies chaos and anarchy. The Joker challenges Batman's moral code, pushing him to confront his greatest fear, that he is not in control, that his mission is not about saving Gotham, but about saving himself from the emotional pain of his past. The Joker's role in Batman's journey is crucial because it forces Batman to ask the hard questions. Is he truly fighting for Gotham, or is he fighting to escape the emotional prison of his own legacy? Batman's redemption will come not from saving Gotham, but from healing himself. Gotham is the battleground, but the true war is within Batman himself. To defeat his own legacy, Batman must confront the fear and grief that have driven him for so long. He must learn to accept vulnerability, to open himself to others, and to heal from the trauma that has defined his life. Only then can Batman truly move beyond his past and find peace. As Batman's struggle with his legacy intensifies, it becomes clear that his true battle is not only against Gotham's criminals, but against the very identity that has defined him for years. The more Batman seeks to uphold the Dark Knight persona, the more he strengthens the chain that keeps him locked in his trauma. His role as Gotham's protector has become a self-imposed cage, one that prevents him from fully healing and confronting the emotional scars that have shaped his mission. As long as he continues to fight without addressing the deep-rooted pain of his past, Batman will remain ensnared in a never-ending cycle of sacrifice, vengeance, and emotional isolation. The destructive nature of perfection. Batman sips fear of imperfection. At the heart of Batman's legacy lies his obsession with perfection. His refusal to kill, his moral code, and his unyielding commitment to justice are all born out of a need to impose order on a chaotic world. Batman believes that perfection, his ability to uphold his moral code no matter the circumstances, is what separates him from the criminals he fights. However, this obsession with perfection is ultimately what keeps Batman trapped in an emotional prison. Batman's fear of imperfection, of being seen as weak or flawed, drives his emotional repression. He believes that if he allows himself to feel, to confront the trauma of his past, or to let down his guard, he will lose control and become just as chaotic and destructive as the criminals he battles. The more Batman strives for perfection, the more he distances himself from his humanity. His refusal to acknowledge his vulnerabilities or his pain keeps him emotionally isolated, unable to form meaningful connections or seek the healing he so desperately needs. This constant pursuit of perfection creates a paradox. Batman cannot move forward because he is so focused on maintaining a flawless image. His refusal to accept imperfection prevents him from experiencing the emotional catharsis that could help him break free from the cycle of trauma. The more Batman strives to be the perfect hero, the more he becomes entrenched in the very legacy he wants to escape. His need to maintain control, to be the idealized figure of the Dark Knight, traps him in a constant state of fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of failure, and fear of being consumed by the very chaos he seeks to prevent. The impact on Batman's relationships, emotional repression and isolation. The destructive nature of Batman's pursuit of perfection is most evident in his relationships. Every person who tries to get close to Batman, whether it's Alfred, Robin, or Rachel, becomes a casualty of his emotional repression. Batman cannot afford to let anyone get too close, because doing so would expose his vulnerabilities and break the facade of the Dark Knight. His inability to allow others in stems from his fear that letting go of control will lead to his own destruction. Alfred, who has been a constant figure of support in Batman's life, often tries to help Bruce Wayne reconnect with his humanity, offering him guidance, wisdom, and unconditional love. However, Batman continually pushes Alfred away, unable to accept that he deserves any emotional comfort. His fear of vulnerability leads him to reject the very person who has cared for him since childhood. Alfred's attempts to help Batman heal are met with resistance, as Batman sees emotional connection as a weakness that could undermine his mission. Similarly, Robin represents another example of Batman's fear of emotional intimacy. Robin, like Alfred, tries to help Batman see that he does not have to fight alone. However, Batman's need for control prevents him from allowing Robin to make his own moral decisions. Batman's desire to protect Robin from the same fate he suffered as a child leads him to impose restrictions on Robin's growth. Batman's refusal to let go of control over his partner's actions and decisions creates tension, preventing Robin from fully embracing his role as a hero. Rachel, the woman Batman loves, is another casualty of his emotional isolation. The Batman's deep love for Rachel represents the possibility of a life beyond Gotham, beyond the Dark Knight persona. However, Batman cannot allow himself to have that life. His emotional detachment prevents him from fully opening up to her, and his fear of losing control keeps him from embracing the love that could save him. Rachel, like the others, is kept at arm's length because Batman cannot allow himself to experience the vulnerability that love entails. In all of these relationships, Batman's legacy of emotional repression and isolation prevents him from experiencing the healing power of connection. His fear of imperfection, of becoming too human, leads him to push away the very people who could help him break free from his past. As a result, Batman continues to suffer alone, unable to heal from the trauma that has defined his life. His relationships suffer because Batman cannot let go of the perfection he believes is necessary to maintain his role as Gotham's protector. The Joker Sip's role in Batman Sip's journey, the ultimate test of self-reflection. The Joker, as Batman's greatest adversary, plays a crucial role in challenging the very foundation of Batman's identity. The Joker represents chaos, unpredictability, and the complete rejection of any moral code. Where Batman embodies order and control, the Joker embraces anarchy and destruction. The Joker's relentless efforts to break Batman's moral code and force him to kill are not just about defeating him, they are about forcing Batman to confront the deeper psychological issues that underpin his mission. The Joker is a mirror to Batman. He represents the chaos that Batman fears lies within him, the uncontrollable force that could consume him if he allows himself to be vulnerable. Batman's refusal to kill is an attempt to hold on to the semblance of control, to maintain the image of the Dark Knight as the perfect hero. But the Joker, by pushing Batman to the brink, forces him to confront the possibility that his code of morality is not a reflection of his true nature, but a defense mechanism to protect him from the fear of losing control. The Joker's manipulation forces Batman to examine whether his actions are truly motivated by a sense of justice or if they are born from his need to control the chaos within himself. The Joker's ultimate goal is not just to break Batman physically, but to expose the fragility of his moral code and force him to confront his own vulnerabilities. Batman's true enemy is not the Joker, but the emotional legacy that the Joker forces him to face. The Joker's chaos forces Batman to question whether his mission is truly about protecting Gotham or if it is about preventing himself from confronting the darkness within. The Joker's ability to manipulate Batman and push him to the brink is a reflection of Batman's own internal struggle, his battle with his legacy, and his fear of vulnerability. The path to healing, confronting the legacy to break free. Batman's true purpose lies not in defeating Gotham's criminals or adhering to his moral code, but in breaking free from the legacy that defines him. Gotham's safety is important, but Batman's mission has become a way of avoiding the emotional trauma that has shaped his identity. The key to Batman's redemption lies in his ability to confront the emotional scars of his past, to accept the imperfection that comes with being human, and to allow himself to heal. Only by breaking free from the legacy of grief, vengeance, and isolation can Batman hope to live a life that is not defined by the trauma of his childhood. The more he clings to his moral code, the more he becomes trapped in the psychological prison he has built for himself. The key to Batman's purpose is not to save Gotham, but to save himself. Only by confronting his own fear, vulnerability, and imperfection can Batman hope to achieve true redemption. In the end, Batman's legacy will not be defined by the criminals he defeats or the victories he achieves in Gotham. It will be defined by his ability to confront his own emotional turmoil, to break free from the past that has defined him, and to live a life that is not governed by fear and isolation. Only then can Batman truly move forward and fulfill his true purpose. As we continue to explore Batman's journey, we can begin to see how his psychological journey intersects with his true purpose, and how this journey is essential to both his identity and his legacy. Batman is more than just a symbol of justice. He is a man whose identity is so intricately tied to his trauma that his mission to protect Gotham becomes more of a psychological battleground than an act of heroism. The role of Batman's legacy in his emotional armor. Throughout his existence as Batman, Bruce Wayne has carefully crafted an emotional armor, a psychological fortress built on his moral code and his unyielding mission to save Gotham. This armor protects him from the pain of his past, but at the same time, it isolates him from the very connections that could help him heal. The more Batman holds on to this emotional armor, the more he solidifies the very legacy he wants to escape. Gotham's criminals are not just the antagonists in Batman's story, they are a reflection of the chaos within himself that he is desperately trying to control. The more Batman fights to save Gotham from crime, the more he becomes a prisoner to the legacy of vengeance that has defined him since childhood. His identity as the Dark Knight, a symbol of fear and justice, is a byproduct of the emotional walls he has built to keep the trauma of his parents' deaths at bay. The fear of vulnerability, of breaking down these emotional barriers, is the root cause of his psychological struggle. This fear pushes Batman to isolate himself from others, to keep his emotions hidden away, and to continue sacrificing his own happiness for the greater good of Gotham. But the emotional cost of this sacrifice becomes increasingly apparent. The legacy of trauma that has shaped Batman's identity is no longer just a part of his past, it is a part of his present and future. Batman's mission to rid Gotham of crime and corruption is ultimately a never-ending battle against his own internal chaos. Each victory against a criminal, each act of heroism, brings Batman no closer to the emotional peace he seeks. Instead, it only serves to deepen his emotional isolation and reinforce the trauma that has defined him. The consequences of emotional isolation, relationships, and redemption. Batman's emotional isolation is perhaps most painfully evident in his relationships. His bond with Alfred is strained by his inability to open up emotionally. Alfred, as the father figure in Bruce Wayne's life, has always been there to offer guidance, comfort, and unconditional love. But Batman, afraid of letting anyone get too close, consistently rejects Alfred's attempts to help him. This fear of emotional connection is a direct result of Batman's legacy of trauma. He cannot allow himself to be vulnerable, to show weakness, because he fears it will unravel the emotional armor he has so carefully constructed. Robin, his young partner, also feels the brunt of Batman's emotional repression. While Robin represents hope, youth, and the possibility of a life beyond Gotham, Batman cannot allow himself to form a bond with him that goes beyond the professional. Batman's obsession with maintaining control over Robin's actions reflects his deep fear of losing control over his own emotional state. He cannot allow Robin to make independent moral decisions because Batman's need to protect his young partner comes from the same place of fear that drives his need to control Gotham. Rachel, the woman Batman loves, is another casualty of his emotional isolation. Rachel represents the possibility of a life beyond the mask, beyond the crusade for justice. She is a symbol of healing, love, and emotional connection. But Batman's fear of vulnerability keeps him from fully embracing her. His refusal to open up to her, to allow himself to let go of his guilt and trauma, creates a barrier between them that Rachel cannot cross. Batman's legacy of emotional repression and isolation prevents him from experiencing the one thing that could save him: love. These strained relationships all point to a deeper truth. Batman's true battle is not against the criminals of Gotham, but against the legacy of emotional isolation and repression that has trapped him. His refusal to confront the trauma of his past, his need to maintain control, and his fear of vulnerability prevent him from forming the deep connections that could help him heal. Gotham may need saving, but so does Batman. And until he can break free from the chains of his past, he will remain a prisoner to his own legacy. The Joker, Batman's sets catalyst for self-reflection and self-destruction. The Joker's role in Batman's life is far more profound than that of a mere adversary. The Joker is a catalyst for Batman's self-reflection. He is not just a villain to be defeated, but a mirror that forces Batman to confront the darkness within himself. Where Batman represents control, order, and morality, the Joker represents chaos, anarchy, and the rejection of all moral codes. But the Joker's true power lies not in his ability to create chaos, but in his ability to challenge Batman's moral code and force him to question the very foundation of his identity. The Joker knows that Batman's refusal to kill is not just about justice, it is about fear. Batman's moral code is a defense mechanism, a psychological crutch that prevents him from confronting the emotional trauma that has defined his life. Every time the Joker challenges Batman to break his rule, he is not just testing Batman's resolve, he is forcing Batman to confront the emotional chaos that he has been running from. The Joker is the embodiment of everything Batman fears: chaos, unpredictability, and the loss of control. But the Joker is also the catalyst that forces Batman to ask the hard questions. Is he truly a hero, or is he a man defined by the trauma of his past? Is his crusade for justice really about saving Gotham, or is it a way to escape the emotional pain he cannot face? The Joker's manipulation forces Batman to question the very nature of his mission. His desire to protect Gotham, his moral code, and his obsession with justice are all tied to the trauma of losing his parents. But by constantly challenging Batman's code, the Joker forces Batman to confront the fact that his actions are not just about heroism, they are about his need to escape the emotional chaos of his past. The Joker's role in Batman's journey is crucial because it forces Batman to confront the truth about his own identity and to reevaluate his true purpose. The true purpose of Batman: confronting the legacy to achieve healing. At the heart of Batman's journey is the question of whether his true purpose lies in saving Gotham or in confronting the legacy that has shaped him. Batman's mission to rid Gotham of crime and corruption is undoubtedly noble, but it is also an attempt to avoid the emotional chaos that continues to haunt him. Gotham's problems mirror Batman's own internal struggles. The more Batman tries to impose order on Gotham, the more he is confronted with the fact that his real enemy is not the criminals of the city, but the emotional turmoil that has defined his life. Batman's true purpose may not be to rid the world of crime or to uphold a moral code. It may be about confronting the legacy of grief, loss, and emotional repression that has kept him trapped in the persona of the Dark Knight. To truly move beyond the legacy of his past, Batman must accept vulnerability, confront the pain of losing his parents, and embrace the possibility of healing. His journey is ultimately not about saving Gotham, but about saving himself. Only by confronting his own trauma can Batman hope to break free from the legacy that has kept him locked in an emotional prison. Until Batman can let go of his obsession with perfection, control, and vengeance, he will remain trapped in the very legacy that defines him. The true path to redemption for Batman lies not in his fight against Gotham's criminals, but in his ability to break free from the emotional chains of his past. Gotham's salvation is intertwined with Batman's own healing, and only when Batman acknowledges the trauma of his past can he begin to live a life beyond the mask of the Dark Knight. As Batman's journey continues, the exploration of his inner turmoil deepens. The conflict between his role as Gotham's protector and his need to confront his own past intensifies. Gotham may stand as the stage for Batman's heroism, but it also represents the psychological prison in which he is trapped. Each battle against crime is not just a fight for justice, it is a fight against the very trauma that continues to dictate his every action. In this endless cycle, Batman is not simply saving Gotham, he is battling the emotional legacy of his parents' deaths, and the fear that this legacy will ultimately define him forever. The burden of the mask, identity, and legacy. One of the most poignant aspects of Batman's journey is the tension between his identity as Bruce Wayne and his persona as the Dark Knight. Bruce Wayne, the man beneath the mask, is often seen as a symbol of wealth and privilege, while Batman, the Dark Knight, embodies justice, fear, and moral clarity. However, the reality is that Bruce Wayne is just as much a mask as Batman is. In many ways, Bruce Wayne represents the part of Batman's identity that he has buried, the part that is still grieving, still wounded, and still vulnerable. The mask of Batman is a psychological construct that allows Bruce Wayne to distance himself from the pain of his past. It is the shield he uses to protect himself from the emotional wounds that have never fully healed. By becoming Batman, Bruce Wayne is able to hide from the raw vulnerability that he fears would consume him. The persona of the Dark Knight is a symbol of strength, control, and unwavering resolve, qualities that Bruce Wayne feels he must embody in order to fulfill his mission. But in adopting this persona, Batman is not simply creating a symbol of justice, he is also constructing a barrier that keeps him from confronting the very legacy of trauma that defines him. Batman's mask is a double-edged sword. It allows him to fight crime, but it also keeps him trapped in the emotional isolation that has become the core of his identity. As long as Batman wears the mask, he continues to suppress the emotions he fears will break him. But in doing so, he also denies himself the opportunity to heal. Gotham may see Batman as a hero, but Bruce Wayne, the man behind the mask, is still the orphaned child haunted by the death of his parents. Until Batman can confront this duality of identity, the mask and the man, he will remain trapped in a cycle of emotional repression and isolation. Batman sips fear of relapse, the legacy of powerlessness. Another crucial aspect of Batman's psychological struggle is his fear of relapse. Batman is defined by his need for control. His crusade against Gotham's criminals, his adherence to his moral code, and his refusal to kill are all rooted in his desire to prevent the world from descending into chaos. But beneath this need for control is the deep fear that if he were to let go, he would lose everything he has worked for. Batman fears that if he allows his emotional barriers to drop, he will succumb to the same darkness that once consumed him, the powerlessness he felt as a child when he was unable to save his parents. This fear of relapse is what makes Batman so resistant to change. He clings to his moral code, his refusal to kill, and his emotional isolation because these are the tools that allow him to maintain control over the chaos that lies within. But this constant need for control also reinforces the legacy of trauma that Batman is trying to avoid. The more he fears losing control, the more entrenched he becomes in the very darkness he is trying to escape. This paradox defines Batman's journey. He cannot heal because he is so afraid of losing the control that defines him. And yet, it is only by letting go of this need for control that Batman can truly break free from the emotional prison of his legacy. Gotham City's role. The city of Batman sips psychological reflection. The more Batman fights to protect Gotham, the more he becomes absorbed by the very darkness that plagues the city. Gotham is not just the physical space in which Batman operates, it is a psychological reflection of Batman himself. Gotham's crime, corruption, and moral decay mirror the emotional chaos that Batman tries so hard to suppress. Each new villain, each new challenge Batman faces is a reflection of the deeper psychological issues that continue to haunt him. What makes Gotham particularly compelling, as a reflection of Batman's legacy, is its cyclical nature. The city's problems never truly go away. they are only temporarily contained. Similarly, Batman's struggles with his own trauma are never truly resolved. Every victory over Gotham's criminals is a fleeting one, as the city's problems return in new and more dangerous forms. This mirror image of Gotham's perpetuity reflects the endless nature of Batman's emotional battles. No matter how many criminals Batman defeats, no matter how many criminals he imprisons, he is still left with the unresolved grief and trauma of his parents' deaths. The Joker, as the ultimate agent of chaos, serves as the most significant reflection of this cycle. The Joker constantly challenges Batman's moral code, and by doing so forces him to confront the deeper psychological truths of his mission. Batman's fight against the Joker is not just about defeating a villain, it is about confronting the legacy that has shaped him. The Joker is not just a criminal, he is the embodiment of the chaos Batman fears within himself. Healing through confrontation. The path to breaking the legacy. Ultimately, Batman's redemption lies not in continuing to fight crime, but in confronting the emotional legacy that has trapped him. Gotham's problems are real and pressing, but Batman's real enemy is the psychological trauma that has defined him. To truly heal, Batman must break free from the need for control, from the constant fear of vulnerability, and from the chains of emotional repression that have bound him. Only by confronting his own legacy, by accepting the possibility of imperfection, and by allowing himself the opportunity to heal, can Batman hope to live a life beyond the mask. The challenge for Batman is to reconcile his dual identities, the Dark Knight, who fights for justice, and the man who is haunted by the past. To truly heal, Batman must accept the possibility that he is not perfect, that he is flawed and vulnerable like everyone else. This acceptance will allow Batman to break free from the emotional prison of his legacy and find redemption, not as a hero, but as a man. Gotham may need Batman, but Batman needs to heal himself before he can truly be the hero Gotham believes him to be. As we reach further into the heart of Batman's internal battle, we can see that the journey of self-discovery and redemption is not just about Batman overcoming external enemies, but about his confrontation with the legacy of his own trauma. Gotham's problems and Batman's moral code are mere manifestations of deeper psychological wounds, wounds that cannot be healed by continuing his crusade as the Dark Knight. The true question lies in whether Batman can break free from this cycle, or whether his legacy will be one of endless suffering and emotional repression. The legacy of fear and the need for control. Batman sips. Psychological fortress. Batman's need for control is central to his identity. From the moment he watched his parents die in the alley, Batman lost control over his life and the world around him. His mission, his persona as the Dark Knight, and his rigid moral code are all responses to that deep-seated fear, the fear of losing control once again. Batman's refusal to kill, his obsession with justice, and his emotional isolation are all tied to his desperate attempt to maintain control over the world, and more importantly, over himself. This need for control, however, is not just about managing Gotham's crime. It is about managing the chaos within him. Batman cannot allow himself to feel vulnerable, to let go of his emotions, because he fears that doing so will unravel him completely. The persona of Batman is his emotional armor, and it is through this armor that he maintains control over his world and his psyche. However, this psychological fortress becomes both his strength and his greatest weakness. By continuing to cling to this mask, Batman prevents himself from truly confronting the trauma that has defined his life. Gotham may be saved, but Batman is never truly free from the chains of his past. Batman's fear of losing control keeps him isolated from the people who could help him heal. He distances himself from Alfred, from Robin, from Rachel, because to allow others into his world would mean confronting the emotional pain of his past. This isolation becomes a reflection of the fear that governs his entire existence, the fear that if he stops, even for a moment, the world and his own psyche will fall apart. By remaining emotionally distant, Batman keeps his trauma at bay, but he also prevents himself from ever truly healing. His greatest battle, in this sense, is not against Gotham's criminals or his moral dilemmas. It is against the fear of vulnerability and the trauma that it unlocks. Batman sips fear of vulnerability. The key to his redemption. The key to Batman's redemption lies not in furthering his mission or proving his heroism, but in confronting his fear of vulnerability. The more Batman fights to protect Gotham and uphold his moral code, the more he becomes trapped in the very legacy of trauma that has shaped him. His refusal to kill is, at its core, a refusal to confront his own emotional chaos. It is a refusal to accept that, just like every other human being, he is flawed and capable of imperfection. To heal, Batman must face the painful truth. His mission is not merely about justice, but about avoiding the emotional fallout of his past. He cannot continue to run from his own vulnerability because in doing so he keeps himself trapped in a cycle of repression and fear. The legacy of his parents' deaths has shaped his every decision, but it is the legacy of emotional repression that defines his inability to heal. Until Batman can break free from his fear of vulnerability and allow himself to experience human connection and emotional release, he will continue to be a prisoner of his own legacy. The Joker, as Batman's primary antagonist, represents the embodiment of chaos and vulnerability. While Batman seeks control, the Joker embraces disorder. The Joker's primary goal is not just to defeat Batman physically, but to break his moral code and expose the fragility of Batman's psyche. The Joker wants Batman to kill, not just to create chaos, but to force Batman to confront his own emotional walls. By pushing Batman to break his rule, the Joker is essentially attempting to force Batman to face the trauma of his past and acknowledge his deepest fears. The Joker's challenges force Batman to reflect on the very things that drive his mission, his fear of becoming like the criminals he fights, and his inability to confront the emotional pain that haunts him. But the Joker's actions also serve as a catalyst for Batman's potential growth. Every time the Joker forces Batman to face his moral limits, Batman is given an opportunity to reflect on his true purpose. Is Batman's mission about saving Gotham, or is it about saving himself from the emotional chaos he cannot escape? The Joker's repeated attempts to break Batman's code are not just tests of Batman's strength, they are invitations for Batman to face the very legacy of fear, grief, and vengeance that defines him. Batman sits true purpose, healing through acceptance and vulnerability. Batman's true purpose, then, is not to defeat Gotham's criminals or uphold a moral code. It is to confront and accept his own humanity. Gotham, in many ways, is a reflection of Batman's internal world, a city filled with darkness and suffering that mirrors the emotional trauma that Batman refuses to confront. The criminals Batman faces are symbols of the chaos and pain that he keeps suppressed. The more Batman fights to keep Gotham safe, the more he becomes entangled in his own unresolved emotional issues. In order to heal, Batman must learn to embrace imperfection, not just in others, but in himself. He must accept that his parents' death is a part of his story, but it does not define him. The fear that drives his moral code, his refusal to kill, and his emotional isolation are all defense mechanisms against the vulnerability that comes with healing. But healing cannot begin until Batman is willing to confront the very pain he has spent his life avoiding. Only by accepting his flaws, his fear, and his emotional wounds can Batman hope to break free from the legacy that has kept him trapped. Batman's redemption lies in breaking free from the need to be perfect, from the obsession with control, and from the emotional isolation he has maintained for so long. By allowing himself to feel, to connect with others, and to confront the trauma of his past, Batman can finally heal from the wounds that have defined him. Gotham may be the battleground, but the true fight lies within Batman himself. Until he can free himself from the emotional chains of his legacy, he will continue to fight an internal war that can never truly be won. As Batman's journey continues to evolve, we move further into his psychological struggle. While Gotham City serves as a physical battleground, it is clear that Batman's true battle is fought within himself. His moral code, his need for control, and his emotional isolation are all mechanisms to avoid confronting the trauma that has shaped his life. The deeper question remains, can Batman truly overcome his legacy and find peace? Or will he remain trapped in the very cycle of grief and vengeance that has defined him for so long? The toll of Batman's vigilantism, heroism, or self-punishment. Batman's role as Gotham's protector is often seen as an act of heroism. But as we peel back the layers of his psyche, it becomes apparent that his vigilantism may also be an act of self-punishment. The trauma of his parents' deaths created a sense of helplessness in Bruce Wayne that he has spent his entire life trying to avoid. He could not save his parents, and in the aftermath of that loss, he vowed to never feel powerless again. His crusade against crime is not just about protecting the citizens of Gotham, it is about trying to redeem himself for not being able to protect his parents. But this need for redemption, driven by guilt and self-blame, becomes an unhealthy obsession. Batman's relentless pursuit of justice keeps him in a constant state of self-punishment. Every time he apprehends a criminal, every time he upholds his moral code, he is reaffirming his belief that he must atone for his past. His heroism is fueled by the emotional pain he has never addressed, and this unyielding need for self-justification prevents him from healing. The more Batman sacrifices himself for Gotham, the more he isolates himself from the very people who might help him heal. His constant battle against Gotham's criminals is not just an act of heroism, it is a cycle of punishment, one that he believes he must endure in order to make up for the perceived failure of his childhood. The deeper Batman goes into this cycle of self-punishment, the more entrenched he becomes in his emotional isolation. His refusal to accept help, to open himself up to others, is directly tied to his belief that he is undeserving of love, connection, and emotional support. He believes that as long as he continues to fight for justice, as long as he sacrifices his own well-being, he will be able to compensate for his past mistakes. This endless self-sacrifice, while it may seem noble on the surface, ultimately serves to reinforce the very legacy of grief and guilt that defines him. The myth of Batman sips perfection, the cost of maintaining control. The idea of perfection is central to Batman's identity. From his refusal to kill to his commitment to justice, Batman has created an idealized version of himself, a symbol of fear and moral authority. But this pursuit of perfection comes at a significant cost. Batman's need to maintain control over every aspect of his life and his mission creates an emotionally stunted existence. He cannot allow himself to acknowledge his own flaws or vulnerabilities, because doing so would mean breaking the illusion of perfection that he has carefully constructed. This need for perfection is rooted in Batman's fear that if he allows himself to be imperfect, he will be consumed by the darkness that lies within. The trauma of losing his parents, coupled with the fear of becoming like the criminals he hunts, drives Batman to uphold an unyielding moral code. This desire to be perfect, to remain the Dark Knight in the eyes of Gotham, prevents Batman from allowing himself the possibility of human connection or emotional healing. He cannot afford to be vulnerable, to be seen as weak, because in his mind that would mean losing control over the very thing that defines him, the need to fight against the chaos and disorder that destroyed his childhood. The consequence of this obsession with perfection is that Batman becomes emotionally isolated. He cannot allow others to share in his pain, because doing so would mean admitting that he is not in control. His relationships with Alfred, Robin, and Rachel all suffer because Batman cannot open up to them. His refusal to acknowledge his own imperfections keeps him from forming the meaningful connections that could help him heal. Instead, he clings to the Dark Knight persona, believing that by doing so, he can protect Gotham and himself from the chaos that threatens to engulf them. But this need for perfection ultimately prevents Batman from ever achieving the emotional release he so desperately needs. The more he strives for perfection, the more he becomes trapped in his own legacy. Gotham sips reflection. The city of Batman sips emotional prison. Gotham, in many ways, is more than just the backdrop for Batman's crusade. It is a reflection of his own emotional state. The city is plagued by crime, corruption, and chaos, mirroring the emotional chaos that Batman refuses to confront within himself. The more Batman fights to restore order to Gotham, the more he is reminded of the emotional disorder that exists within him. Each villain he faces, each challenge he overcomes, reflects the deeper emotional issues Batman continues to suppress. The chaos that Gotham faces is the same chaos that Batman faces internally. His need to impose order on the city is a reflection of his desperate need to maintain control over his emotions. But this need for control is ultimately futile. The more Batman tries to impose order on Gotham, the more he is reminded that the darkness within the city and within himself cannot be eradicated through force or control alone. Gotham's problems, like Batman's own emotional struggles, are cyclical. The city's corruption returns again and again, and the more Batman fights to restore order, the more he is confronted with the same chaos. The Joker, as the embodiment of chaos, represents the internal struggle that Batman faces. The Joker's unpredictability and disregard for moral boundaries challenge Batman's need for control and order. The Joker forces Batman to confront the possibility that his entire crusade for justice is rooted in his fear of imperfection. His need to maintain control over a world that has shown him how powerless he truly is. The Joker is Batman's dark mirror, an external manifestation of the internal chaos that Batman refuses to acknowledge. As Batman battles the Joker, he is not just fighting a villain, he is fighting the very fear and trauma that have shaped his life. Breaking the legacy, Batman sets true purpose. Ultimately, Batman's true purpose is not in continuing his mission to protect Gotham, but in confronting and breaking free from the legacy of trauma and emotional isolation that has defined his life. Gotham's problems will never be solved through the force of Batman's will or the perfection of his moral code. The city's redemption, and Batman's own redemption, lie in his ability to confront the emotional pain that has defined him. Only by breaking free from the need to control, from the fear of vulnerability, and from the trauma of his past, can Batman hope to live a life beyond the mask of the Dark Knight? Gotham's salvation is tied to Batman's own healing. As long as Batman remains trapped in his legacy of grief, vengeance, and fear, he will continue to fight an internal battle that can never be won. Batman's true enemy is not the criminals of Gotham, but the emotional chaos and psychological wounds that have defined his existence. His crusade is a reflection of his inability to accept his own humanity, to embrace his flaws and imperfections, and to allow himself the emotional freedom to heal. Only when Batman confronts his own legacy, accepts his vulnerabilities, and embraces the possibility of healing, can he truly break free from the cycle of trauma and find redemption. The path to Batman's true purpose lies not in saving Gotham through force or violence, but in saving himself through emotional reconciliation and acceptance. Gotham may need the Dark Knight, but the Dark Knight needs to heal before he can truly be the hero that Gotham believes him to be. As Batman's psychological journey progresses, it becomes clear that his legacy, while rooted in trauma and loss, is not something that can be easily defeated through mere action or adherence to a moral code. Batman's purpose has been shaped by the loss of his parents, but that purpose has also become a psychological prison. His refusal to heal, his emotional repression, and his deep need for control trap him in a cycle of perpetual struggle. The more he fights Gotham's criminals, the more he reinforces the legacy of grief and trauma that has defined him. To move beyond his past, Batman must confront not just the criminals in his city, but the psychological barriers that prevent him from embracing the humanity he has buried so deeply. The legacy of fear. Batman sips relationship with his own humanity. Batman's relationship with fear is one of the most complicated aspects of his character. Fear is both a tool and a psychological obstacle. As a child, Batman was powerless in the face of his parents' death. As an adult, he has transformed fear into a weapon. By becoming the Dark Knight, Batman embodies the very thing that struck terror into him as a child, the shadow that lingered over Gotham's streets, that he now uses to strike fear into the hearts of criminals. But in doing so, Batman distorts fear into something that controls him. His fear of becoming like the very criminals he fights, his fear of weakness, and his fear of vulnerability all converge to create an identity built on emotional repression. Batman's fear is more than a tool in his arsenal. It is a reflection of his deeper struggle with his own identity, his need to control everything around him, to maintain the mask of the Dark Knight, stems from the fear that without it, he will revert to the helpless child who watched his parents die. Fear has become Batman's constant companion, but it has also become his greatest enemy. The fear of imperfection, of emotional vulnerability, and of confronting his past keeps Batman trapped in the persona of the Dark Knight. His very legacy is built on the fear that if he stops, if he lets go of his moral code, if he allows himself to feel, he will be consumed by the same chaos that took his parents from him. But the more Batman tries to suppress this fear, the more it controls him. The key to Batman's true purpose lies in his ability to face this fear, not just of external threats, but of his own emotional fragility. Batman's fear is not just of losing control or of becoming like the criminals he hunts. His greatest fear is of confronting the trauma of his past. Until Batman can accept this fear and use it as a tool for healing, rather than a shield to keep the pain at bay, he will remain bound by the very legacy he seeks to overcome. The burden of the Dark Knight. How Batman's persona keeps him locked in his legacy. The Dark Knight is more than just a name. It is Batman's emotional armor, a persona he has crafted over years of grieving his parents' deaths. This mask of fear, justice, and moral absolutism is the shield that protects Batman from the raw emotion of loss and vulnerability. But this persona is also a prison, locking Batman into an endless cycle of sacrifice, punishment, and emotional isolation. By constantly maintaining the image of the Dark Knight, Batman prevents himself from confronting the emotions he has buried for so long. The persona of Batman allows Bruce Wayne to operate with cold, calculated efficiency. It is the mask that separates him from the child who witnessed the murder of his parents. But as long as Bruce Wayne continues to wear this mask, he will never be free of the legacy that defines him. Batman's quest for justice is, in many ways, a quest for redemption, but it is a redemption that is rooted in emotional repression rather than healing. Batman is not just trying to rid Gotham of crime, he is trying to rid himself of the emotional scars that have shaped him. But by continuing to wear the mask, Batman is denying himself the opportunity to heal. The tragic irony of Batman's journey is that the very persona he has crafted to protect himself, his emotional armor, becomes the thing that prevents him from confronting the emotional chaos of his past. His mission to rid Gotham of crime is noble, but it also serves to keep him detached from the one thing that could truly help him, his humanity. The more Batman tries to protect Gotham and maintain the image of the Dark Knight, the more he reinforces the emotional walls that keep him isolated. Until Batman can let go of this persona and allow himself to be vulnerable, he will continue to be trapped in the cycle of fear, grief, and emotional repression that has defined his life. The Joker, a catalyst for Batman's self-discovery. The Joker, in many ways, serves as the catalyst for Batman's self-discovery. Unlike other villains Batman has faced, the Joker does not seek to destroy Gotham through physical force. Instead, he seeks to destroy Batman's carefully constructed identity. The Joker's goal is not to kill Batman, but to break him, to expose the psychological fragility beneath the mask. The Joker forces Batman to confront the very fear that has shaped his existence. The fear of becoming like the criminals he hunts, the fear of losing control, and the fear of his own emotional weakness. Every time the Joker challenges Batman's moral code, every time he pushes Batman to kill or break his rule, the Joker is forcing Batman to question the foundation of his identity. Batman's refusal to kill is not simply a moral choice. It is a psychological defense against the emotional chaos he fears will consume him. The Joker, by constantly pushing Batman to the brink, forces him to confront this chaos head-on. The Joker knows that the key to breaking Batman lies not in defeating him physically, but in exposing the emotional core that Batman has worked so hard to suppress. The Joker is the embodiment of the chaos Batman fears within himself, but as much as the Joker seeks to destroy Batman, he also forces Batman to face the deeper psychological truths of his existence. The Joker's provocations force Batman to reflect on the trauma that drives his mission and on the legacy of grief, guilt, and fear that has shaped him. The Joker does not just challenge Batman's sense of justice, he challenges Batman's very identity, forcing him to question whether he is truly the hero Gotham believes him to be, or whether he is simply a man running from the trauma of his past. Breaking free. Batman's true purpose and the path to redemption. Batman's true purpose lies not in defeating Gotham's criminals or upholding a rigid moral code, but in confronting the trauma and emotional repression that have defined him. Gotham is the stage for Batman's external struggle, but the true battle is within. The key to Batman's redemption lies in his ability to break free from the psychological prison of his legacy. Only by confronting the trauma of his past, by accepting his vulnerability, and by allowing himself to heal, can Batman truly become the hero Gotham needs. To heal, Batman must face the very fear that has controlled him for so long, the fear of imperfection, the fear of vulnerability, and the fear of emotional chaos. These fears have kept Batman locked in an emotional cage, unable to connect with others or acknowledge the pain of his past. His obsession with control, his refusal to kill, and his emotional isolation have been psychological defenses designed to protect him from facing this pain. But these defenses have also prevented him from healing. The key to Batman's true purpose is to let go of the need for control, to confront the fear of vulnerability, and to allow himself to experience the emotional release that comes with confronting his trauma. Batman's true redemption will come not from continuing his crusade against crime, but from allowing himself to heal. Gotham may need the Dark Knight, but Batman needs to heal before he can truly be the hero Gotham believes him to be. Until he can confront the legacy of his past, break free from his fear of vulnerability, and embrace his humanity, Batman will remain trapped in the very cycle of trauma that has defined his existence. As we delve further into Batman's complex journey, the psychological and emotional layers continue to unfold, revealing just how deeply Batman's past trauma shapes his present. At its core, Batman's crusade is not only about justice for Gotham, it's about his struggle to reconcile with his own humanity and the legacy of loss that defines him. As he battles Gotham's criminal underworld, Batman is simultaneously waging a war against the very elements of his psyche that drive him to fight: guilt, fear, isolation, and the need for redemption. The burden of Batman sips sacrifice, the consequences of repression. Batman's path has been defined by an unrelenting series of sacrifices, many of which come at the expense of his emotional health. His sacrifice isn't just physical, it's deeply psychological. Over the years, Batman has sacrificed not only his happiness, but also his emotional well-being. He isolates himself from the world, rejecting connections with those who care for him, all in the name of his mission. This is not a selfless act, as often portrayed. It is a mechanism of self-punishment driven by unresolved grief and trauma. His role as a hero, his tireless crusade against crime, becomes a way for him to avoid the emotional chaos that lies beneath the surface. His refusal to open up to others and the emotional walls he has constructed are a direct result of his need to protect himself from the vulnerability that could make him feel weak, vulnerable, and afraid. Batman's mission, while noble in its intent to protect Gotham, is also his way of avoiding confronting the truth of his own pain. The deeper Batman invests himself into his role as Gotham's protector, the more he reinforces his legacy of self-sacrifice and isolation. Each victory over Gotham's criminals provides temporary relief, but never addresses the root of Batman's inner struggle, the grief of losing his parents and the trauma that has followed him throughout his life. The more he sacrifices, the further he distances himself from the healing he so desperately needs. The true cost of Batman's heroism is not just the physical toll of his battles, but the emotional toll of the isolation and repression he endures in the name of his mission. Gotham, as the mirror of Batman's internal struggles. Gotham itself is more than just the setting for Batman's heroics. It is a mirror of his internal struggles. The city's corruption, violence, and chaotic nature are a reflection of the emotional chaos Batman has kept suppressed. The more Gotham descends into crime, the more Batman is reminded of the chaos that exists within his mind. Every criminal he faces, every villain he defeats, is not just an external battle. It is a reflection of his ongoing internal conflict. Batman's mission is rooted in the idea that he must restore order to Gotham, that he must fix what is broken in the city. But the reality is that Gotham's corruption and violence will always return, just as Batman's emotional struggles continue to persist. This cyclical nature of Gotham's problems mirrors the cyclical nature of Batman's trauma. No matter how much he fights, no matter how many criminals he apprehends, Batman cannot escape the emotional scars of his past. Gotham, like Batman's inner world, remains in a constant state of turmoil. Every new villain that emerges is not just a new challenge for Batman to face. It is a new manifestation of the emotional chaos that lies within him. Each criminal, each villain, represents an aspect of Batman's own psyche, an aspect that he must confront in order to break free from the legacy of trauma that has defined his life. The more Batman tries to save Gotham from its darkness, the more he is reminded of his own inability to escape the darkness within himself. His fight is not just against the criminals of Gotham, but against the very legacy of fear, loss, and grief that drives his every action. The role of Alfred and Robin, emotional isolation and the need for connection. Batman's emotional isolation, while necessary for maintaining the facade of the Dark Knight, has taken a toll on the relationships with those closest to him. Alfred, his loyal butler and father figure, represents a steady presence of love and care in Bruce Wayne's life. Yet, despite Alfred's constant support, Batman pushes him away, unable to accept the affection and guidance that could provide the emotional healing he desperately needs. This emotional distance stems from Batman's belief that he must bear the burden of his trauma alone. He cannot allow himself to accept that he is worthy of love and care because he believes that doing so would make him weak, and worse, it would mean acknowledging the very vulnerability he has spent his life avoiding. Similarly, Robin, the young partner Batman has taken under his wing, is caught in the web of Batman's emotional repression. While Batman views Robin as a symbol of hope, youth, and the potential for redemption, he is also a reminder of Batman's own inability to let go of control. Batman's need to protect Robin from the dangers of Gotham's crime prevents him from allowing Robin to make his own moral decisions. The strict control Batman imposes on Robin reflects his fear of letting go and trusting others to share the emotional burden of their mission. Robin, in many ways, represents the emotional vulnerability that Batman fears and represses. Rachel, too, represents a potential path for Batman to move beyond his trauma. She symbolizes the possibility of love and a life free from the endless cycle of fighting and isolation. However, despite his deep feelings for her, Batman cannot allow himself to fully open up to Rachel. His emotional walls prevent him from embracing the possibility of a future with her, and as a result, Rachel becomes another casualty of Batman's inability to reconcile with his own emotional needs. Batman's relationships with Alfred, Robin, and Rachel are all strained because of his emotional repression. The very people who care for him, who could offer him healing, are pushed away because Batman cannot allow himself to experience the vulnerability that comes with love and connection. His isolation is both self-imposed and self-destructive, and it perpetuates the very legacy of trauma and fear that has controlled his life. Breaking free, the need for emotional vulnerability and healing. Batman's true purpose, it seems, is not to continue his unrelenting battle against Gotham's criminals, or to uphold an unwavering moral code. His real mission is to heal. The key to Batman's redemption lies in his ability to confront the trauma that has defined him and allow himself to be vulnerable. Batman has spent so much of his life running from the emotional chaos of his past that he has neglected the one thing that could truly heal him, his humanity. Only by accepting his vulnerability, by letting go of his need for control, and by allowing himself to form meaningful connections, can Batman hope to break free from the emotional prison of his legacy. The true path to healing lies not in further sacrifices, not in more battles against Gotham's criminals, but in Batman's willingness to face his own trauma head-on. Gotham may need Batman, but the Dark Knight is also a man who needs to heal. Gotham's salvation depends on Batman's ability to heal himself. Only then can he truly be the hero the city believes him to be. Batman must confront the legacy of fear, grief, and guilt that has shaped his life. He must let go of the illusion of perfection and embrace the reality that he is flawed, human, and worthy of love. By confronting his fear of vulnerability and allowing himself to heal, Batman can finally break free from the cycle of emotional isolation that has defined him. The Dark Knight can only find peace when he acknowledges his humanity and allows himself to heal from the wounds that have kept him trapped for so long. In conclusion, Batman's journey is not just one of crime fighting and heroism. It is a deeply psychological odyssey that revolves around the confrontation of his own emotional legacy. While his mission to protect Gotham is driven by noble intentions, his inability to confront the trauma of his past, specifically the loss of his parents, has defined his identity and actions. The Dark Knight persona, forged out of fear, guilt, and vengeance, becomes both his greatest strength and his deepest prison. Batman's moral code, his refusal to kill, and his need for control are all psychological mechanisms that prevent him from truly healing. These actions are rooted in the trauma he experienced as a child and the fear of imperfection and vulnerability that continues to control him. Gotham's never-ending cycle of crime and corruption serves as a metaphor for the emotional chaos Batman faces internally. No matter how many criminals he defeats, his internal struggles remain unresolved. The Joker, as Batman's greatest adversary, plays a pivotal role in forcing Batman to confront his deepest fears. The Joker's challenges are not merely physical. They push Batman to question the very core of his identity and mission. Through the Joker, Batman is confronted with the truth that his purpose is not to save Gotham through sheer force, but to save himself from the emotional legacy of his past. This battle is not about defeating Gotham's criminals. It is about Batman defeating the psychological and emotional chains that have kept him trapped for so long. Ultimately, Batman's true redemption lies in his ability to heal, not through more acts of heroism or further sacrifices, but through emotional vulnerability and the acceptance of his humanity. Gotham may need the Dark Knight, but the Dark Knight needs to heal from the emotional scars that have defined him. Only by breaking free from the fear, isolation, and emotional repression that have shaped his legacy can Batman hope to find peace, not just as a hero, but as a man. Batman's true purpose, then, is not to fight crime indefinitely, but to confront the emotional chaos that drives him, to break free from the legacy that holds him captive, and to ultimately embrace the healing power of connection, vulnerability, and self-acceptance. Only through this journey of emotional reconciliation can Batman truly fulfill his purpose, not as the Dark Knight, but as a man who has transcended the legacy of trauma and found redemption.